Hi there. Happy third Thursday in June. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. It is the third Thursday in June, Chris.
I had
I
to
can
think
see
about
I
that.
can see you mentally trying to figure out if I was right or not. So welcome. This week, so last week we covered the overview of podcasting. This week we're talking about podcast marketing strategy. And who better to talk about podcast marketing strategy than the world's oldest podcasters, Chris and John. I apologize. I probably shouldn't keep saying that. Chris and John have had marketing over coffee for 15 years, which in is like 100 years in marketing, because podcasts tend to come and go. And you guys have figured out a formula for your podcast strategy where it's stuck around for 15 years and still has a really strong subscribership. So, all of that being said, where would you like to start with podcast marketing strategy?
So last week we covered about why bother with podcasting, right? And talked about funnels, the customer journey. We talked about your podcast concept overall and what goals you should set. This week we're going to talk about three pieces of podcast marketing strategy: audience strategy, content strategy, and channel strategy. So the first place to start really is on the content strategy. And this is starting with your brand. Like, what do you want your podcast brand to be? Now, there's a couple of different ways of tackling this. One is to come up with something that is inherently unique, that clearly communicates what it's, something that is distinct. And the other is what John calls cup of soup marketing, which is where the product is so obviously named that there's no doubt in anyone's mind what it's about, even if it's not the most original name.
I'm always a fan of just calling something what it is instead of, and this is, I'm an N of one amongst us. I like to call things exactly what it is versus coming up with like a clever, catchy name that you then have to go into, lots of content to explain. So I would lean more towards the cup of soup marketing.
Well, so how did you come up with our podcast name, In-Ear Insights?
I didn't come up with that. You
did. Oh,
I came up with Inbox Insights based on In-Ear Insights.
Oh, okay. I don't remember.
So In-Ear Insights, what you came up with. So we are Trust Insights. And so the idea was that you're listening to a podcast theoretically through your headphones in your ear. So the insights are in ear. So In-Ear Insights. And therefore, our newsletter is then Inbox Insights. So you're getting the same insights in your inbox. So it is
Gotcha.
a little bit marketing and clever, but still tells you exactly what it is.
Right. Well, like marketing over coffee very much was literal.
Right.
It's two guys talking marketing in a coffee shop.
Well, and if you missed that, John and Chris went over that origin story last week, and you can catch last week's episode at trustinsights.ai/YouTube, where John actually told, I wasn't aware of this. I'd never heard the origin story of marketing over coffee, which I found to be really interesting.
The amazing secret origin.
The other thing, and this is something that drives me up a wall with a lot of podcasts, is naming your show in a way that is audio friendly. And by audio friendly, one of the things we recommend is doing the Siri test or the Alexa test, depending on which smart assistant you prefer. If I tell my smartphone, hey, go to marketingovercoffee.com, 98% of the time, as long as I'm not slurring my words, it will successfully open up a browser and go there. If you have to spell out, go to, 5guys.2-1, something, some long, crazy, tongue-twisting URL, no one's going to remember that. No one's going to mentally be able to hear that and then transmit it to someone else.
Were those things that you consider, John, when coming up with marketing over coffee?
Yeah.
Well, I guess Alexa didn't exist then.
We didn't have to worry about her causing trouble. Yeah, at that point. Again, the dinosaurs roamed the earth, so there wasn't much tech in our way at that point. But a big thing with, and this goes even to copywriting and other marketing stuff, is cognitive load. Tamsin Webster has some great stuff on this when talking about with presentations. It's kind of like, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You're always given, like, say attention as a penny. You're usually only given about 5 or 10 cents. And so if you're going to have to burn, 3 cents explaining how Super Spring Podcast is actually about marketing analytics and whatever, so those are 2 pennies that you're not going to get back. And now you need to tell your story with the remaining change. And so anytime you can make something that's just so blindingly obvious that any idiot can get it without having to do any work, it's you're earning some trust, and you're saving that powder for when you do actually have something tough to explain, like either the concepts you're teaching or why you should subscribe, or go to the next step in sales and marketing stuff. So yeah, but it's a challenge. It's like that's what separates the great copywriters from the hacks. It's like a great copywriter will be able to write something where it all just seems so obvious. And, in some situations, the hacks just aren't as good, but in terrible situations, the hacks go out of their way to make it sound more complicated and create an aura of exclusivity around something that they just make it even more difficult to understand. And it just burns your results.
The other thing, and this was super important back in the early days of podcasting, is that in the early days, marketing your show, a good chunk of it was promos, which is essentially audio spots that you would do on other people's shows. And again, if you had a complicated domain name that was difficult to pronounce or difficult to remember, when somebody heard you on Dawn and Drew or Daily Source Code or whatever, they would not remember. But somebody's saying in your promo, "Hey, go to marketingovercoffee.com." That's easy to remember. No one has to struggle to remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's your branding section. Again, podcasting still is an audio format in a lot of ways. So having something that is audio friendly for your brand is really important. And again, do the Siri test, do the Alexa test when you're coming up with show names. Try pronouncing it, particularly with the domain name, and see if the Smart Assistant can get you to the website as with minimal difficulty. And if a machine can't understand you, humans definitely not going to understand you, because machines are not great at that.
So I have a question. Sorry. When it comes to branding, how important is the art for a podcast? So obviously a lot of podcasts are now published on YouTube, which is a visual medium. And so, if people are still strictly listening to podcasts on audio players, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever, how important is it when you're starting your branding, thinking about it, like to have opening credits and a sequence and a logo and, all of that, if it's a podcast and you don't plan on including video? Like, does it matter?
There's a huge subfield in marketing of audio branding, right? Of distinctive sounds. Like there are distinctive sounds, you know this from music. You can identify a song sometimes by the first 2 notes. Like, I know exactly what sound. You hear those first 2 notes, and that's "Welcome to the Black Parade" by My Chemical Romance. You've got it immediately. If you listen to Marketing Over Coffee, the first 2 notes of Mellow G by Funkmasters, that we've used that for 16 years now. And if you're running, for example, if you're out for a jog and you've just got your podcast player opening, the moment you hear those notes, you know exactly what show you're about to listen to. There's no question whatsoever.
For the record, my best is identifying a song with the first inhale that a singer has before the music even starts. So top that, music nerds.
You've got the breath. There is a whole bunch of stuff too, and we have not tested any of this stuff. But as far as your image for your podcast, like for a while it was urban legend that like you had to have pictures of the hosts on the logo. You wanted to do that, and this is actually coming up with iOS 17. I guess now they're going to allow custom images for each episode. In the past in the podcast player, you just had your show logo. But now they're going to be, for each specific show, you'll have a unique logo. So we're already doing that for the blog. So we have some unique images. The question is, where do you want to go? And that's the kind of stuff that, if I was an entrepreneur on fire where we had 1 million listeners, we'd be testing all kinds of crazy stuff. But with us down in the, 14, 15,000 listener range, it's kind of, is it really worth it to do that kind of A/B testing?
I think, and this has the potential to go off track, so we'll just mention it very quickly. I think there are some very good generative tools that are being developed that can essentially do some of that work for us. But the second part of content strategy is the form of content. So with any publication, but particularly a podcast, you're going to want to generate 2 sets of content: long form and short form. The long form obviously is the show itself, which is the audio. There's probably going to be video, long form video, that like a YouTube video, like exactly what we're doing right now. There is probably going to be text as well, or there should be text. One of the things that most shows do most wrong is they fail to provide either a transcript or show notes. And that is like 101 of podcasting. If you're not including detailed show notes or transcript, you miss the boat.
How did you start? What did you start with for Marketing Over Coffee? Because obviously, at that time, 15 years ago, AI generated transcripts didn't exist. I'm sure there were transcript services. Did you have your transcripts outsourced, or did you include show notes? Did it evolve? How did you set the strategy?
Yeah, it used to be that there were just services you would buy 3 or 4 or 5 hours of transcript services. And so when the show dropped, it would go to somebody and we'd get a file back in text. So things have really, and if people want to dig into that, Katie and I did the whole generative AI showdown and put Otter and 2 other tools head to head to kind of see what works. And there's a bunch of different ways to do it now. But yeah, it's so much faster and easier now to get that done.
Yep. With In-Ear Insights, we use automated transcription, and we've started using automated summarization as well, so that you get a nice short summary up front, and then if you really want the transcript, or the search engine wants the transcript, it's available. So those are your long form components, and then your short form components are text, image, audio, and video. So are there images that you can be using for certain image-based social networks, video, short video clips and things that, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, it's anything that contains stories. You obviously have short form text in the form of social media posts, and of course, short audio snippets as well, little promo reels, zingers, things like that. So the brand, and the 2 forms of content really form the pillars of the content strategy for the podcast. And those are all things that you need to work out before you start recording.
So we have a quick question from Bob. Is there a podcast player that lets the listener save those golden moments in a podcast? So let's take a step back. What's a golden moment?
Well, I think every podcast has a sizzle point. There's like one quote from the author that's way better and something you'd want to share to somebody else. As far as I know, there's no players that can clip like that. And YouTube, you can, when you check the share, you can click and put a time code on it. But yeah, and again, it's the same deal. I don't play, there's literally dozens of these podcast players that all do different stuff. But yeah, I don't have anything. I don't know, Chris, is there anything that you've seen that can do that?
YouTube was where I was going to go with that. So YouTube allows you to clip as long as the uploader permits clips, which, by the way, if you are running a podcast on YouTube and you're not letting people clip your episode, you should probably change that.
Got it. All right.
Okay, so that's content strategy. Next is audience strategy, which is, who are these people? Who do we want to be talking to? And there's 3 considerations for this. It's, what do you want to talk about? Right? There is, what do people want to listen to? And then what is not being talked about? And so there's a variety of different ways to get at this. In the beginning, like for Marketing Over Coffee, it was pretty straightforward. We wanted to talk about marketing. There were like 2 other marketing podcasts, so the space was pretty empty, and people were definitely willing to listen to it. These days, it's a bit harder to do that.
Why wouldn't that be the first thing you do ahead of content strategy?
I would say that you would put content strategy first so that you understand just how much work you're about to get into, because at that point you may decide, I don't even want to do this. Forget about the audience. I don't even want to do this much work.
Which makes sense. But wouldn't you want to first see if the audience even exists?
Presumably. And again, this goes back to the goals from last week, right? If the goal is for you to just entertain yourself making a show, then it doesn't matter what the audience is. If the goal is lead generation for your company, then yes, you need to figure out, is there an audience in your company's audience segment that is receptive to podcasts?
So obviously, when Marketing Over Coffee started, there wasn't a lot of competition. But if you were to start a marketing podcast today, you would be drowning in marketing podcasts. So how would one get started with figuring out where is my audience? What do they want to listen to? What do I want to say? Like, how do you get started with that?
My suggestion for that would be to start doing some market research. There are a variety of excellent tools that can help you do some of the market research to even just understand the basics of who are these people. Because there's so much competition, a lot of today's tools can actually help understand this. So this is a tool, one that is a favorite of mine called Talkwalker. Which, by the way, they do have a free version as well. We use the enterprise version. So what I put in Marketing Over Coffee here, and I said, show me the word cloud of this thing. Like, okay, what is Marketing Over Coffee about as a show, right? You see special offers and listeners and stuff like that. But search engine marketing is in there. We see Michael Stelzner, we see analytics, we see Trust Insights, obviously artificial intelligence, the advertising industry. So you can get a pretty immediate quick glance at sort of what the show is about. And then if you pop on over to the demographics tab, you get a very, very skinny, high level look at the audience. So this panel looks at traditional gender data from social networks. This panel looks at biographical stuff. So like in your Twitter bio or your Instagram bio, if you put in your pronouns, for example, you will split this out. So you can see in both cases, Marketing Over Coffee has a very, very strong bias towards people who identify as male as the core audience. And age range, you see sort of that mid-professional, 25 to 34. Although you do see some other folks there. Again, this is what you would be able to see for any show. So if I were to put in, say, like, the Joe Rogan podcast, I would get a chance to see the demographics of that show. So this is one of the tools I would start with.
So it sounds like you would first need to know who your competition is.
Yep. And a great way to do that is actually with our friends, the large language models, right? So let's go ahead over to good old ChatGPT. Say, what are the top marketing podcasts to listen to? Now, again, this is going to be a snapshot in time because the knowledge base here ends in September 2021, but you see a bunch of different shows here.
Good job, guys. Coming up number one
within ChatGPT. Now, again, use multiple services, right? Go to Google Bard, say, let's just that exact question. We'll see. But this is a relatively quick way to look at what they think. So there's Social Pros, there's John Jansen's show and stuff like this, Marketing Companion. So Bard gives you a different set of competitors. But these would all be competitors that you would start with, and then you start feeding them into a social analytics tool to say, okay, who is their audience?
John, you have reactions?
Bard obviously stole a moron from that list.
That's fantastic.
There are other tools too. It's like, for example, in the tool called Brand24, which is a Polish analytics company, you can do very similar things where, let's go ahead and go to topic analysis. So this is going to use for Trust Insights because I didn't set Marketing Over Coffee up in time for today's show. We see here sort of ChatGPT's marketing impact, Trust Insights birth rate. So this is going to cluster together different topics and themes. This tool also, you can dig in and look at who are the individual influencers for a given show, and try and understand who those audiences, who those people are. Look at the different sources. So I would use social and digital analytics tools to kind of zero in on the competitors and the basic demographics, the behaviors, and the interests, and what other shows talk about.
So this isn't the type of analysis that we do, so I don't know that I've ever asked this question, but are there third-party tools where you can get Spotify stats or podcast download stats, listener stats, Apple Music stats, similar to like these social listening tools where you can get some level of data around Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram and so on and so forth? Is there something comparable that does that for YouTube and Spotify and all the major podcast publishers?
There are. So for podcasts, there's indexes and things. I believe Podchaser is one that a lot of PR agencies use to identify podcasts to pitch and then send wildly off-topic pitches to them. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Brazilian PR agency. I keep sending me crazy stuff. Like, I do analytics. I don't do fashion. For YouTube, TubeBuddy is a fantastic tool that is not only good for optimization of your own YouTube channel, but also can give you some insights competitively there. As we've talked about on the Trust Insights podcast with the Martech 11,000, if it exists, there's probably a tool for it.
Yeah,
It's a
Chartable
wonderful
is
thing.
one where we get a lot of stuff from. I noticed that we are number 102 in Apple Podcast Ukraine business, so we're on the edge of top 100 in the Ukraine there.
Nice.
Okay, we'll take it. So that's your audience digging in. Who are the people that likely would listen to the show? And the nice thing about the topic analysis in these tools is it does help you answer the question of what isn't being talked about. If you have subject matter expertise in a space, you can say like, yeah, this is this is what all the top shows are all talking about. ChatGPT this week, right? So what are they not talking about? Oh, hey, Google Analytics is going to shut off in 15 days. Maybe we should talk about that instead if you wanted to carve out a niche for yourself. The third branch is channel strategy. And this is partly dependent on your audience strategy, partly dependent on your content strategy. Like, if you don't know who your audience is and you don't know what content you're capable of making, then going to channel strategy is a bad idea. So you want to get those two things down first. And channel strategy is, where are we going to put stuff? So you're talking about things like your mailing list. Are you going to have one? Where's it going to live? Is it going to be on a hosted service like Substack? Or are you going to roll your own? What social media channels are you going to promote on, right? Which channels make sense for marketing over coffee? Should we be on TikTok? Maybe, maybe not. Should we be on YouTube? Should we be on LinkedIn? Definitely. Video channels, where are you going to post your videos? So obviously YouTube, which is the largest podcast discovery engine in the world, among other things, is important. For audio, where are you going to distribute your podcast? Are there channels that are very important to your podcast or to your audience specifically? Really good platforms. So we use a platform called Libsyn, and we use it both for marketing over coffee and for Trust Insights. And Libsyn gives you can see here a gazillion different places that you could publish, and every now and again they add something new. So you have to go in and decide, okay, where do I want to try and send my podcast, and we'll talk about this in 2 weeks when we talk about measurement. You'll also want to figure out where out of all these places we're sending the show are people going to tune in. And then the last split thing on the channel distribution is, where's your website going to live, and what are you going to put on it?
Do you have to have a website if you have a podcast?
You don't have to have one. Just like your car does not have to have a heater when you live in New England. Technically, you can live without it, but it makes it much more difficult. If you plan on taking sponsorships, if you plan on doing any advertising, if you want to be able to understand your audience in greater depth, you should definitely have a website running some kind of analytics tool so that you can get a good look at who your audience is.
Yeah, it's a great question, because there's so many different ways that you can go with that. It's actually pretty complicated. You'd think it would be a simple question, but it's really not, because one thing you can do, so Libsyn that we use as our service there for hosting the audio files, they actually, when you sign up, will build a website under their own domain. So you can have a website on their service and they host your podcasts. So yeah, one thing is the audio file needs to be stored digitally someplace. So that's either going to be on a website that you run or that the service itself holds. And then all of the major providers allow you to, you could host the audio with them, but then point them to your own website. And then in that case, you control the domain, and you can have an email address set up so people can email to that, domain. But and definitely, if you're just getting started and you're trying to figure out if this is a viable topic, then just go to Libsyn and have them run the website and just upload the audio files to them, and don't get involved with any of that. But if in the long run you're building a brand and control the property, then eventually you're going to want to have your own domain.
When you both started Marketing Over Coffee, did you put together this kind of podcast marketing strategy, or did it evolve over time?
Yeah, no, it was just like, let's make this up. The one thing is, all the tools were garbage then. So we had to have our own website and we had to have our own email. And even, yeah, you kind of miss the joy that we feel of like when you see that Libsyn page of like those 35 different services and you just check the boxes and, oh, yeah, send to Spotify, send to iTunes. Like we would have to spend hours going through the back end code of the website, manually typing code to like make it go to Spotify or make it go somewhere else. Like all that used to be a huge headache, and people were like manually tweaking these files. And as tech has marched on, like all that stuff goes away. Nobody cares that we had to suffer 10 years ago. They're just like, yeah, whatever. You guys are stupid. You should have waited until the tools were good.
Or you were ahead of the game and have a 15-year-old podcast with a huge subscriber list.
Good, yeah. First mover advantage does pay off. The suffering does get you to a higher place.
Exactly. But to also to dig into your question a bit more, if you're using, if you have a website and you're funneling traffic to it, you can get sort of another checkpoint for demographics that you can't normally get from a podcasting service. Because podcasting services, even the best ones, really only still give you download based data, right? Here's how many downloads. They don't have any audience information. When you go into like Google Analytics, you can see very clearly who are the different people. Like what here's the interests category, right? Technophiles, shutterbugs, avid investors, business professionals. This syncs very well with A, who listens to the show, and B, the kind of content that we tend to put out. So they're kind of synchronous in that respect. What's interesting though is that there is a disparity when you look at the gender. It's not as sharply here. So it's 60% male, 40% female on the website. So it is slightly different. But you do see the same number for age group. You do see more in the older brackets out here than you do in other places. And of course, you can see globally where your show has reached. So again, this is part of, we talked about last week about your goals for your podcast. If you are using it as a form of income, then having this information is going to be super important for your media kit to be able to say like, hey, here's who listens to our show. Here's the demographics about them, the countries that they're from, the languages they speak. And even today, it's very difficult to beat Google Analytics for this sort of thing.
I would think too, for a site like Marketing Over Coffee, the podcast. So if I were smart and I wanted to sponsor a podcast, my first thought would be to go to Marketing Over Coffee and see, okay, do they have a media kit that I can immediately just look at so I can say, you know what? They have a really great subscriber base. They've been doing this a long time. I would be stupid not to be, sponsoring at least, 1 month worth of Marketing Over Coffee episodes because it's published. It's still weekly. Is that correct?
Yeah, we run it weekly, and we do have a rate card. I don't have it up on the website because, unfortunately, it's completely Wild West auction for the space. There's some quarters where we can charge over rack rate, and there's others where Crazy John's fire sale is in full. So it's, I keep a real tight leash on that, and it's also really weird for shoppers too because our cost per thousand looks insane, right? I mean, we charge well over $100 per thousand, and people that are, spreadsheet shopping for spreadsheets are looking to buy for $10 to $30 a thousand. Mm. But the fact is, it's like, okay, so you buy Joe Rogan. See, now I'm in trouble. I already mentioned a name because I was going to say, okay, so you look at that audience and you pay $30 per thousand, but then you're like, okay, well, only half that audience can read, so you're really paying $60 a thousand, and then only 10% of them are employed, so you're really paying $600 a thousand, and so it goes from there. And so the end result with Marketing Over Coffee is, we say, look, it's all about leads, and that's where we go. It's, if you get, what are 10 leads to you, and if 1 or 2 of those close every month, how much is that worth to you? And there's a lot of MarTech firms that are like, yeah, we don't care about CPM. That means nothing to us. Like, we need to get 2 or 3 leads in every month, and that's worth, that's why we have companies that have stayed on for years, because it's just, they see the return and they get the leads, as opposed to just kind of like the okay, we're going to buy 65 podcasts and we don't care, what language they speak. That's a different thing.
Yeah, there's definitely tonnage versus targeted quality. When you see this in the YouTube space a lot of folks, shopping for YouTube channels are just looking at subscriber numbers. If you got 1 million subscribers, we want to be on your show. We don't care what it is. I've seen some hilariously bad sponsorships on shows. I saw one on a cooking channel that was like industrial freight shipping. I'm like, okay, I mean that seems like an interesting buy. Not the channel I would have gone on for that sponsorship, but we see that for sure within marketing over coffee too. Some of the pitches we get are just wildly off topic.
Yeah, you'd think that people would be smart enough to not advertise things that make marketing jobs go away. Like that would be on list, but there are there's these tools like, hey, this automated system will write all your content for you. Fire all your copywriters. And I'm like, well, a big chunk of our audience are copywriters, but I'll take your money. So here we go.
I feel like you're giving a lot of credit to the ad buyers. And that's not to say they're not thinking it through, but if their goal is awareness, then they're just trying to get it out there because they're being told awareness, awareness, awareness. Versus if their goal is leads and conversions, then you're going to look at more targeted, more focused podcasts to meet, your needs. But like if someone's breathing down my neck saying awareness, then yeah, I'm just going to look for whatever podcasts have the biggest number of subscribers and, worry about who those people are later because that's not my problem. I just got to get them in the door.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right on the mark with that because we totally see that. We see some people that, they throw us a 60-second spot and that's the last we hear of them until the next quarter. And then there's other people that are like, every week I want to change the offer and we're going to have targeted links every week. And at least for us as a marketing podcast, we're actually like, yeah, that's cool. Let's do that. Let's test all this damn stuff. Mm-hmm. Whereas other podcasts are like, oh, dude, you need to go away. Like, this is way too annoying to work with you.
Yep. One of the things that other big mistakes we see podcasts make when it comes to their content strategy is not having a mailing list, not having some way to reliably get back in touch with your audience. Now, yes, some platforms do have email list stuff sort of built in, but it really is. It's one of those things that's so foundational because not only does it give you the ability to reach out to your audience when a new episode drops or something like that, if you want it to be that frequent, but it also gives you the ability to do analysis of your audience to say, who are these people, right? So this is a service called Clearbit. They've been in the B2B space for a while, and you upload. This is particularly good for podcasts. You upload your mailing list by email addresses. You can hash it so that it's protected, and then it tells you from your mailing list, the technologies, the industries, the company sizes, employee things, what percentage list is personal email versus company email. But this is a fantastic tool. Again, especially if you're in B2B, this is essential for being able to put together a good media kit to showcase your podcast. So that's, in terms of podcast marketing strategy, those are the big three: audience, content, and channel.
How many of those do you have nailed down, John?
Oh, none of them. God, horrible shape. It was funny. I was just laughing actually about newsletter. Like newsletter, that Chris hit that. That is like the number one. I tell every podcaster, like, you have to have a newsletter if you don't have a newsletter. And so our newsletter is basically monthly because I scheduled to do it weekly. And, that's how it ends up working,
and as the chief statistician of Trust Insights, we keep you pretty busy.
Right. That is, yeah, that's the problem is that, there are other higher competing priorities that, I basically like every morning look at like, okay, what's the dollar sign of stuff? Okay, we work down in descending value. And so, newsletter is always number 37 on the list. I need to have a sliding scale for that. Like with each week it ages, I need to double the number on the newsletter so it climbs to the top at some point. But it's a never-ending battle. It's just like any other startup, it's like how much because you want to be pouring time into the content, right? Ultimately, right? If you have great organic content, then people will find the show sooner or later. No amount of marketing will save you from a crappy show. So, but at the same time too, you've got to get the name out there if you want to grow. Otherwise, you're gonna do the drip growth strategy, which God forbid you're still podcasting 15 years later, you know, you don't know situation.
And so with that, your podcast marketing strategy, so you have those 3 pillars, and within each of those 3 pillars, I would recommend that you go through the 5P process, because what you want to be able to do for each of those things is know what it is you're measuring. And in 2 episodes, next week is tactics, and then the week after that is going to be measurement. So you want to know what the heck you're measuring. And so go through the 5 Ps for each of those 3 strategy pillars, and then you'll have a good understanding of, why are we doing this? Who's involved? What's the process? What are the tools that we need? And how are we going to measure success?
Exactly. So, yeah, next week we're going to talk tactics. So a lot of the stuff we talked through this week, we're going to talk about at a very granular level, promotional tactics in particular. So we're going to cover everything from the advertising systems that are available to you to some of the real world things that you can do, because we've done some really interesting stuff over the years with Marketing Over Coffee in particular for in real world promotion, dinners and other interesting things. We'll talk about accompanying publications, the use of giveaways, SEO when it comes to podcasts, syndication. So we've got next week's going to be an overstuffed week.
I'm looking forward to hearing specifically around, because John, I know one of the tactics, and this is a teaser, I know one of the tactics you use is SMS messaging. And so I'm really interested to hear how that's working out, for how you're using it and how successful it's been for Marketing Over Coffee. So, that's one of the things that I'm most looking forward to with next week's episode.
Tune in next week for Adventures in SMS.
Yep, it's gonna be a fun show. Next week, Katie will be off hunting unicorns. She is on a safari to hunt down the elusive unicorns of Massachusetts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All of that
is
is true.
Unicorn with a Boston baseball hat on.
Well, that's the only kind we make. Get out of here, kid.
I know. Come on, kid. Let's go to
Come on,
get some cigs, lottery tickets, and some dunks. We're good.
All right. I think that's enough for this week. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.